Imagine holding a winning lottery ticket worth $1 billion. You look at the numbers, you check them once, then again. It's real. You've already won. And then, calmly, deliberately, you strike a match and watch it burn. Not because it's fake, not because you're unsure, but because you're afraid of what happens next. Sounds insane, right? But in the corporate world, something very close to that actually happened. And it wasn't done by a reckless startup or an inexperienced founder. It was done by one of the most powerful, disciplined, and dominant monopolies in modern history. A company that didn't just fail to predict the future, they helped invent it. They held it in their hands. And then hesitated. That company was Kodak. And this isn't just a story about bankruptcy. It's a story about something far more dangerous. What happens when success becomes a trap? To understand how catastrophic this decision really was, you have to understand what Kodak used to be. For most of the 20th century, Kodak wasn't just a company, it was photography. If you took a picture anywhere in the Western world, there was an overwhelming chance that the camera was Kodak, the film was Kodak, the paper was Kodak, and the chemicals used to develop that image were Kodak. They didn't compete in the market, they defined it. By the 1990s, Kodak controlled nearly 90% of the film market in the United States. They weren't just winning, they were the system itself, and their business model was brutally effective. Kodak didn't make most of its money from selling cameras. The camera was just the entry point. Sometimes they would sell it at almost no profit just to get it into your hands, because once you owned it, you were locked in. Film, development, printing. Every memory you captured pulled you deeper into their ecosystem. Again, and again, and again. It wasn't just a product, it was a loop, and Kodak owned the loop. But underneath that dominance, something was already beginning to shift. In 1975, inside Kodak's own research labs, a young engineer named Steve Sasson built something strange. It was bulky, heavy, almost primitive. It recorded images onto a cassette tape. It took over 20 seconds to capture a single black and white image, but it did something no one had ever done before. It captured a photograph without film. It was the first digital camera. When Sasson brought it into the boardroom, he wasn't just showing a prototype, he was showing the future. But the reaction wasn't excitement, it was discomfort, because everyone in that room understood what it meant. If this technology worked, it wouldn't just create a new business, it would destroy their existing one. This is where most people misunderstand the Kodak story. Kodak didn't ignore digital photography because they were stupid. They understood it. That was the problem. They saw exactly where it was going, and they knew what it would cost them. A world without film meant no consumables, no recurring revenue, no chemical dominance. It meant dismantling the very machine that made them powerful. So they hesitated, they explored, they researched, but they didn't commit, because committing meant sacrifice. And while Kodak hesitated, others moved. Fujifilm entered aggressively, leaner, more flexible, more willing to compete on price. They didn't carry Kodak's legacy weight. They didn't need to protect the past, they just needed to win. And slowly, almost quietly at first, they began taking market share. Not with a single blow, but with pressure, relentless pressure, price cuts, better margins, faster decisions. Kodak wasn't losing overnight, but they were bleeding. At the same time, a different kind of competitor was emerging. Not chemical companies, electronics companies, Sony, Canon, Nikon. These companies weren't protecting an old business model. They were building a new one. They understood sensors, software, miniaturization. They didn't need film to survive, so they didn't hesitate. By the late 1990s, the shift in consumer behavior was undeniable. People didn't want to wait days to see their photos. They didn't want to pay for development. They didn't want to print everything. They wanted control. They wanted immediacy. They wanted to see the image instantly. Digital didn't just offer that. It made the old system feel slow. Kodak wasn't absent from this transition. They invested billions into digital imaging. They developed cutting-edge sensors. They owned thousands of valuable patents. On paper, they were positioned to lead. But strategy is not just about technology, it's about decisions. And Kodak's decisions were conflicted. Instead of replacing their old business, they tried to protect it. They built digital tools that pushed people back toward printing. They created systems designed to keep paper relevant. They treated digital as an extension of film. But it wasn't. It was a replacement. And nowhere is that clearer than what happened next. In 2001, Kodak acquired a photo-sharing platform called Ophoto. At the time, this was a brilliant move. Millions of users, digital images, online sharing. They had everything they needed to dominate. This was before social media exploded, before platforms like Instagram redefined how we use images. Kodak had a head start, but they didn't see it that way. They didn't see a social platform. They saw a printing funnel. Instead of building a network where people could connect, share, and engage, they used Ophoto to sell photo prints. They tried to pull the digital world back into paper. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time in history, photos weren't just memories. They were communication. They were identity. They were social currency. And Kodak missed it. Then came the moment that made everything irreversible. In 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone. And with it, the camera became something else entirely. Not a device you carried, but something that was always with you, always connected, always ready. Photography didn't just become instant, it became constant. And more importantly, it became social by default. At that point, the old system collapsed. Film was already gone. Standalone cameras began to decline. And Kodak's core business model, the loop that once made them dominant, stopped working. They tried to pivot. Printers, pharmaceuticals, licensing deals. But transformation at that scale is brutally difficult because the real problem wasn't technology, it was structure. It was incentives. It was identity. The people leading Kodak weren't software builders. They were chemical engineers. They had spent decades optimizing a physical process. Now they were being asked to abandon it, to replace it, to destroy it. In 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. A company that once defined an industry was forced to dismantle itself to survive. They sold off patents, cut tens of thousands of jobs, and watched as the future they had once glimpsed was built by someone else. Kodak's story isn't about stupidity. It's about something far more uncomfortable. They were smart, they were disciplined, and the decisions they made sense. In the world they understood, but the world changed, and they couldn't change with it. There's a well-known idea often associated with Steve Jobs. If you don't cannibalize your own business, someone else will. Kodak faced that choice, protect what works today, or destroy it to build what comes next. They hesitated. They tried to do both, and in the end, they lost both. So the real question isn't just what Kodak did wrong. The real question is, which companies today are making the same decision? Which ones are protecting the present while quietly ignoring the future? Because history doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes, and sometimes it gives you a warning.